Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk about Diablo Immortal, the newly announced after BlizzCon game from Blizzard, which has received massive negative reaction and outcry from the community at large on the internet, especially on Reddit and Twitter. But I don't want to talk about that, the outrage and the anger and the frustration and the controversy and all that stuff. I don't want to talk about that because it's pretty obvious that a lot of people are upset. And while I agree with maybe the majority of what they're saying, 55%, I also disagree with some of what they have to say. But in the end, it doesn't really matter because my opinion doesn't really matter. If the majority of people hate something, the majority of people hate something. Rather, I want to shed some light on something that I seem to tap into a little bit more easily, and that is the why of the matter. Why did Diablo and why did the Blizzard devs and their team decide to choose to do this, and why did they decide to go this route with their decision? And they partnered with NetEase, and why have all of these things happened? And why it's a lot more obvious than some of you might be thinking. And of course, it all boils down in the end to money. I know. But I also want to outline a couple of other things that have made this ultimate manifestation perhaps a little bit easier to project. If we go back a few years and we see kind of the machinations, the cogs and the wheels turning, this was or could have been expected. And a lot of people did expect it, actually. They did predict that it would happen, but I don't think this is the end. I think this is we're just kind of on the way to this becoming the norm, no matter how much we kick and scream to the contrary. But we can still kick and scream, and I still do want Diablo 4 on PC, don't get me wrong. But why did Blizzard decide to do this for their next title? Well, you kind of got to rewind a little bit, and you got to recognize a couple of different things in tandem. So we've got Blizzard here in one corner. We've got the globalization of video games happening simultaneously, and it's been happening for a long time. It's not a new idea, but, you know, aggregators like Steam and also the introduction of games that can just be played anywhere all the time. It's all digital now, and worldwide servers or even dedicated servers within the same game. You have the Asias, the Americas, Europe for most Blizzard games and for other titles as well. Those two things exist simultaneously, and then we've seen in the last decade or so the very rapid rise of the Chinese consumer in terms of video games. China's a huge country, you guys know. Billions of people live there, you guys know. And, you know, millions of them, if not possibly billions, are video game fans. They're huge fans like we are. And the market there is different, but it's a market nonetheless. And so when you take those three things into consideration and you see some of the history, some of the back-end stuff, it starts to make a lot more sense why Diablo devs and why the company in general was like, you know what? Diablo Mobile seems like a win-win for everybody, except the salty PC hardcore fan boys and girls. So with a little bit of the history involved, we can go back to, I think it was 2014 or 2015, when Diablo or Blizzard partnered with NetEase, NetEase being the same company that created or is creating or co-publishing Diablo Immortal. They published Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls in China. And at the time, about 2 weeks after it was initially published, it was published at the end of April, and then early in May, they were already reporting numbers. So less than half a month into the game being released in China, the expansion, it had already sold over 1 million copies. So it's not public. None of the numbers are public for how many players you have for Diablo 3 at any given time. We don't know how many are from China, but the sales numbers are insane. And Diablo 3 remains the, I think, third highest grossing PC game of all time, partially because there are so many Diablo fans, but also because there are so many Chinese Diablo fans. And that is evidenced by how quickly they started buying Reaper of Souls. And that's after Diablo 3 had been out for a long time. And remember, the globalization thing, so everybody knew in China or otherwise that Diablo 3 was not a huge hit. It was not Diablo 2. It was a good game, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't create the same kind of fervor, and it didn't have the same kind of lasting power and just obsession that Diablo 2 created in fans for a long time. And while Diablo 3 maybe created a lot of new fans that became Blizzard fans, there's no doubt that Diablo 2 is one of the originators for Blizzard fans and Diablo fans in general, and that includes myself. I didn't really know Blizzard games before Diablo 2 kind of heard about Diablo 1, but I was a bit too young at the time to really dive headfirst into video games. But when Diablo 2 came out, when it was announced, I kind of fell head over heels in love with it, and by extension, Blizzard, because they were making a dope-ass product, so I was kind of into it. So they released this with NetEase, but NetEase has also been publishing Diablo or Blizzard games for a long time. Blizzard does exist beyond Diablo, I know. They published, Here's the Storm, Overwatch, Minecraft 2, or StarCraft 2, Minecraft, World of Warcraft. All of this stuff is being published in China by NetEase. So basically the entire Blizzard catalog is republished by NetEase in China. And this has to do with Chinese laws and the way that it works with them accepting or rejecting / banning games when they come into China. But they have to be brought in or published, repackaged in some way by a Chinese company so that profits are made by Chinese people. It's just a way that the country works. But you can see that same thing happening with more recent and more popular companies like Epic Games. They were even purchased in part by Tencent, the company that's now publishing Fortnite and Fortnite Mobile in China. So it's this gigantic ripple effect of Chinese publishers and these huge billion-dollar Chinese companies like Tencent, which is, by the way, the 10th largest, I believe, company in the world, period, for any kind of market and any kind of product. So these guys are making insane amounts of money, and now they're moving into the gaming space, both mobile and console and PC. And now the difference here with mobile is that having lived in Korea and having seen things from a more Asian perspective, seen it, not necessarily experienced it myself, but seen it in other people, I can say that the attitude of the general gamer towards mobile games is different. They're much more accepting of it than we are, we being North Americans. And that is just kind of a product of the way that companies push their games on multiple platforms. And you can see Blizzard trying to emulate that a little bit. They released Hearthstone initially for PC and Mac, and then just a couple months later, or a month later, they start releasing it for iOS as a mobile app. And then by the end of the next year, I believe, so roughly 11 months later, 12 months later, Hearthstone was fully available as a free-to-play with in-app purchases type of mobile game on your Android phone, on your whatever Windows phone, rest in peace. So they've been kind of starting to ape that style more and more. And so I just, in my opinion, and the feeling that I get from seeing all of this holistically, played out over the years and played out in other companies like Grinding Gear Games being bought out in large part as well. PUBG, having the majority of its first year downloads in China, 10 million in China versus only 8 million in North America. It just kind of makes sense. Now, of course, it primarily makes sense financially, but again, people are making games for people to play their games. If they know that more people in China are going to play their game than North America anyways, why not tailor their game more to that audience? Now, this is not to say that the North American audience is losing its power or losing its influence over game makers and publishers. There's still tons of publishers that prioritize the market, but there is definitely a shift going on, and Diablo Immortal is just in the middle of this shift. It's definitely not the first game to be shifted this way, and it definitely won't be the last. Whether it's good or not obviously depends on your perspective. If you like mobile games, maybe you're happy about it because it's a big name game coming to mobile, and it creates more serious discussion and critical examination of mobile games rather than just being Farmville, Candy Crush, and a bunch of other garbage reskin. It's a serious game, and there are always and there always will be, and there are already criticisms of Diablo Immortal, but we can't really make those finite or very specific criticisms about the game until we see it and we actually play it firsthand. And people have demoed it and they've given their thoughts on Reddit, but that's just a small glimpse of a not yet finished product. So I wouldn't really hold those reactions in very high esteem or high regard, because you got to see the final published product, and I'm going to withhold my judgment until I see that. But again, if you're a mobile gamer, you're happy about it in some way. If you're not a mobile gamer, if you're a PC gamer, you're probably pretty pissed, because this means that they're developing and they're dedicating resources to something that's not what you want. And that makes sense. But it's also makes sense that they do it in the first place, because this has kind of been the writing on the wall for maybe close to 10 years now. And it's only going to continue until we can have mobile games that are exactly the same as PC games because the hardware is identical, because we can shrink it down. But that's like whatever, how many X years in the future. So I wanted to try to illuminate the kind of why side of things. I know there was a bit of sidetracking, there was a bit of kind of fraying of topics, but it is important to see why game developers are doing these things, because it's interesting. Sometimes I get to talk to people who develop games over on the other side of the ocean, and yeah, they have a bit of a different way of approaching their audience. The consumer base is different, and so they have different needs and they create different demands for things. And we start to see those things either coalesce or kind of grind against one another and each other, not only in what's being produced, i.e. the games, but also in the community's reaction, whether it's negative, positive, or both. A little bit of mix. But anyways, let me know what you guys think of Diablo Immortal. Let me know if this has helped you out, if this has illuminated things for you, and if not, well, it's still all just about money in the end. Subscribe if you enjoy the content and you want to support me. And of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.